Thank you for coming. Tonight we have the pleasure of meeting Jennifer Teets, who will present her book,
Yeah.
Electric Brine. I prepared a little text. I'm just going to read it for you. How can we live together on a damaged planet? That was my starting question. What instruments, which tools can we use to make our lives and the future of all living beings better? Mm-hmm. From Audre Lorde, we learned that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And the poet and feminist activist Audre Lorde wrote of the need to embrace difference, not to merely tolerate people who are different, but to embrace difference because it provides a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark like a dialectic. Mm-hmm. If we want to change or dismantle the existing system, we will have to look for other tools than those we used in times of modernity. Language is an important tool. Language and the meaning we give to words, the way we fill in and use concepts in our thinking. We can fabulate and confabulate. Fortunately, we have sparing partners in this. Original thinkers, scientists and activists such as Donna Haraway, author of Staying with the Trouble, a most influential book from 2016, or Lynn Margulis, the creator of the symbiogenetic theory. And KIOSK will screen a documentary about her work later in the month of November. Or someone as Masanobu Fukuoka, author of the 1978 book, The One Straw Revolution. Or Anna Ducky Jordan, the Berlin-based artist currently exhibiting at KIOSK, whose oeuvre is deeply invested in underwater research, the world of the ocean creatures, and the longing for symbiosis, to name but a few. And writer and thinker Jennifer Teets collected for us in her book, Electric Brine, 6 amazing voices of poets, writers, and scientists who propose tools to see the world differently, who highlight the concept of flow in our thinking and creating, who propound to see water or its misty partner fog and atmospheres as a system of travel and capture, as a system consisting of fluid boundaries. These writers show us how language can create a fog of ambiguity and is a condensation of reference. These authors learn us how modernity can soon be in the past if we approach it as liquid between chance and contrivance. Let's enter with Electric Brine and Jennifer Teets the possibility of a shifting and forever flowing world. Jennifer Teets is a curator, a writer, a researcher, and occasional performer. Now I'm using your CV. Today she is based in Paris. Her research and writing combines inquiry, science studies, philosophy, and fictocritique, and performs as an interrogative springboard for her curatorial practice. She is curator of The World in Which We Occur, a research-based entity that explores themes concerned with artistic inquiry, philosophy of science, and ecology. The World in Which We Occur began as a live event series over the telephone inspired by James Lee Byers' World Question Center in 2014, and has thus expanded to other formats such as Matter in Flux, an online monthly study group with participants and guest thinkers from different fields across the world. Together with artist-philosopher Lorenzo, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Chirintione, she curates Elusive Earths, an ongoing in situ work, process, and inquiry that looks to the elusiveness of rare clays, soils, and earths with forgotten origins, a research that resulted in an exhibition that was, amongst others, presented at Établissement d'en Face in Brussels in 2014. So, Jennifer, that's the section. Here's the floor for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much to KIOSK and KASK, and I also met with the curatorial students, and some of you are in the audience this evening. That was really interesting. I think there's a lot of threads that you're going to see this evening that are, that correlate to a lot of the the ideas that we were working through and discussing. And so what I'm going to try to do this evening is present to you the volume Electric Brine vis-a-vis a kind of quest around this idea of research, what we talked about also today. I'll do so via the author's contributions and correlate them with the objectives of the world in which we occur, and also the purpose of the volume. I'd like to start by reading some of the introductory notes that I wrote. There's two introductions in the book, and one is authored by myself and the other is by my collaborator for many years, Margarita Mendes, which goes into more of the nature of the entity, and whereas I write more intricately about the actual book itself and some other kind of ideas that I think we can discuss this evening. So I'll read from the book and take it from there. Brine is a solution, water that is saturated or strongly impregnated with salt. The laws of diffusion mean that the salt moves from the liquid an area of higher concentration into any other liquid or object it comes into contact with, a place of lower concentration. The solution's electrical qualities denote its chemistry, namely electrolysis, with brine being the electrolyte. Adding the word electric to the saturated fluid propels the mind to a fantastical place of currents, toxic spew, and cosmological genesis. In nautical literature, the briny deep is interchangeable with ocean. Writing this, I look at and skim internet posts on scientific explorations of brine pools nestled in the Gulf of Mexico's deep ocean beds. These singular formations have a salinity higher than the ocean, and due to their formulation and inability to mix, they are anoxic and deadly to most organisms teetering on the brink. Cutthroat eels, scavengers, come ashore the pool's mussel bed in search of something edible. Some even venture into the brine, attempting to breathe the environment. If they don't escape, they eventually die due to cerebral hypoxia, but the anoxic nature of the pool prevents their decay, and they are preserved. A cascade of brine runs off the slope, slips, dissipates into the ocean that holds it. Our categories of thought, too, begin to dissolve. So to kind of jump into where this sort of thinking originates from and the nature and the name of the world in which we occur, I have this slide here of John Dewey's very influential work from 1925. It's called Experience in Nature. And here you see some of the main core fundamental ideas of Dewey about the problem of knowledge. So here he's situating knowledge. In other different books, and he goes into the problem of the idea of the public, but in this particular book, he does go into the problem of knowledge. And so the world in which we occur itself, at the name, is a sobriquet extracted from this book, and it talks to us, and I write about this in the introduction, about how his lesson speaks to us about the process of learning itself, and how this nuance of learning and or striving for what you can say an object of imagination is actually a continuation of a natural process, and it's something that that man, or I guess it would be much less gendered today, is learned from the world in which he occurs, and not in which he is arbitrarily injecting into that world. So it's about occurring versus like projecting or injecting into. So this is a really interesting, I think, notion. So it's about how we are constantly navigating our world and are experiencing our world and all its complexities and contradictions, and how we kind of internalize that and externalize that. The second influence is in the live event series, which is discussed in depth in the back of the book in the appendix, relates to James Lee Byers' work, which was actually kind of invented and thought of in Antwerp in 1969, because James Lee Byers, the American conceptual artist, was invited there to I think it's called White Gallery, yeah, in '64 to have an exhibition. And there he starts really marvelous kind of idea around the formulation of a question. So he starts building a whole kind of identity around the question, and about how philosophical doubt combined with phenomenological rejection can inform or claim to or kind of look into the ideas of certainty. There's this really wonderful piece that was written in art form in 1984 by a scholar of James Lee Byers, who looks into all of James Lee Byers' kind of thinking. I kind of wanted to talk about some of that because it informs a lot about the decision making that we had into making this a live event series, which is all about interrogation. So that's like the question I sent to Elders is all speech interrogative? Is all speech about a question rather than seeking forth an answer? So Byers, he looked at, and in the filming, which later that was filmed in Brussels, he looked at the idea of the question as a kind of entry point to many different forms of or ways to situate subjectivity. Some of the most intriguing entries were his own questions like that seek out changing horizons, or of interrogation as cultural strata shifts. For example, he asks what questions have disappeared. Other things that confront the reader with the place of a question within his or her own or their own personal horizon. Do you have an affection for a question? He asks. Other things that position like a nomadic object. Imagine the palpability of a question. For other things such as, or other questions that question the informative as opposed to the interrogative. And that goes indeed into the functions of language, right? And that's something that we're looking more and more at within the world in which we occur. He also asks like dialectical implications of infinite regress of a question. This question is able to question itself, so the idea of the question kind of tumbling upon itself. And also other interrogative recasting of the artist's own activity, like is a question in itself a big art? Is a question itself art, right? And these I liked a lot, where his own questions of imagination that look into the most sort of intricate of interrogatives. Is there an imaginary question out there? So this in the work, and I write, the artist is clad in a white robe, and he's seen telephoning, guests across the world on live television next to a daisy chain of performers. Interestingly, we would never have thought that this performance actually was entirely pink. It's just because of the black and white television, but it was all of them were entirely clad in pink. And there he asks, if the critical questions were gathered, and he hypothesized, would you then have a picture of the contemporary problems of Earth people? And within our series, like Byers, we too kind of reach out to theorists and thinkers across the globe seeking out these kind of questions over their answers. So here you see, like, when the series really began in its early years in 2014, this is in the context of the Baltic Triennial. And here we are phoning up different people across the world, asking them to pose a question related to a theme such as grief and climate change, or say the Pharmacon, a range of different themes that were really important for the live event series that later carried on to many different venues across the world, the Museu Berardo in Portugal. And then Nottingham, contemporary, etc. So in recent years, the live event series has grown out of this experiment and kind of staging and transforming or borrowing from Byers' experiment to become like a tent-like organism where it hosts educational experiments such as what was mentioned as Matter in Flux, which is the initiative's associated online study group that reads fiction, poetry, and prose and engages in critical analysis and sociological inquiry. So that's a really engaging process that we do, and even this evening there's conversations going on. This is the last Tuesday of the month. But that's a very active entity that continues to build with these thinkers that you will be able to read in Electric Brine. So I read, the book's title, Electric Brine, is borrowed from feminist theorist and geographer Sophie Lewis's essay, where we find the formulation of this nomenclature. To my knowledge, all humans in history have been manufactured underwater in amniotic fluid. Think about it. How do you bring a body to life? Filmmakers and fiction writers have always implied that you need to have a tank. Dr. Frankenstein's adult baby and any knockoff version of him is animated in a bath full of electric brine. The effort that goes into husbanding that body of water is self-evidently thought of as creative labor. The opening lines of Lewis set the stage for her larger premise to define a communized mode of social reproduction where reproductive justice and water justice are inseparable. It's a politics of water that floods, spills, births, and drowns. As a subject, Electric Brine traverses imaginations, an obscure visual metaphor that anchors the materialist pursuit. Watery bodies may exist within watery bodies, but the complexities of these bodies are less apparent from above. This makes me think of creation as creativity itself and the power and pleasure of making, or its flip side, that of living with toxic matter. So the writings in Electric Brine point to some of the textures and meanings that craft such ambiguity. Another, also the first poet in the book is the Canadian poet Dionne Brand, and she's also very aware of water, and her poems are too, how it surrounds us inside and out as a system of both travel and capture. This is the inside of the book, so you can see a little bit this GIF. As a system of boundaries, an ossuary is a place where bones are stored. Her piece titled Ossuary 1, included here, is a part of a long narrative poem that discharges in a stream of images and contemplations, pausing only in breathless commas, never coming to a full stop. It is extracted from a larger composition of 15 sections of various lengths, all of them numbered ossuaries instead of chapters. The main character, Yasmin, speaks of her life. She speaks of modernity, soon to become the past, asking what elements of our culture and of her own life will remain. Traumas and chemicals echo through words like feudal metal glyphs. Yasmin recalls her life as solitary, perfectible strangeness. In the ossuary, the persistence of a new life amid the ongoing destruction of oceans and air is a challenge for her to distill. This piece of diasporic poetic theory unfolds how we might navigate different scales of catastrophe today. Also in a primer text for our readers, historian of science Barbara Orland, she's based in Basel, we've worked with her a number of years. She elaborates and traces a concept of flow in the history of knowledge to ancient Greek philosophy and Heraclitus's use of the river as a metaphor for permanent change in the world. Broadly, her essay sets forth a summary of the history of thinking about and regulating material flows. She charts flows of liquids, such as bodily fluids and invisible moving substances, outlining how flow was increasingly applied to movements of discrete units, to corpuscular and molecular matter in motion, and later on, electron flow in history. I'm going to show you a video by the next writer who's also featured here in the, so you can see a bit of the layout. And this is essayist Esther Leslie. We actually launched with her in Paris a couple weeks ago. She came from London. She's a professor in political aesthetics at Birkbeck University. And in her essay, she writes and thinks about flows in a mistier way, and thinks also about fog as a kind of stoppage or a hindrance. And this is really an interesting perspective of thinking about how flow also kind of reaches its halt, right? In this text, she looks at how fogs and atmospheres and clouds embedded in technoscience and media are a kind of fuzzy contour of mood, temperature, and air, and how they coalesce in between her words is where I find that cohesion concerns flow. So I just want to, this is a really interesting, she also taught all on fog theory for recently, and the new school, and I wanted to show you a clip from that, so hope you can hear it.
So let's think about the phenomenality of froth. It's a continuous, steady state, but in the form of a flowing system. So it's made of bubbles, they move, they coalesce. Some bubbles burst, there's a lot of activity within froth. Next week we'll look at foam. There's something can be more stable about foam, and foam can also be hard, but you can't get hard froths, at least I'm not aware of them. So it's almost like foam that's become more active, and it's quite a precarious form. And I think we often perceive froth in some sort of movement, whether that's in the grand scale, and we'll come to think a bit about sort of space-time quantum froth, or just fizzing a little bit, as the sea comes in, or maybe on the top of a coffee. Zephynescent, which is a result of its structure. So froth is a combination of liquid and gas, often water and air, in first natural forms, but obviously many other liquids and many other gases. And the liquid content of froth gets less and less upwards because it's always sort of draining down through the system. So it's more airy at the top, where it becomes wispy. That's why bits of froth can detach and blow away. So that's the physicochemistry of froth. And those are characteristics that can be used, for example, in mineral separation, using froth flotation, whereby there's a valuable mineral you want to get, and you use surface chemistry to make it repel water. So you make it hydrophobic, and then you shoot air bubbles in, and the hydrophobic particles will stick to froth and float up to the surface, so you can then extract them from that surface layer. And all the waste and the stuff you don't want stays in the liquid below. So that produces a precious froth. More often, though, froth is seen as something worthless or without substance, a triviality, or also a scum. So froth can be scum, can be this surface muck or dirt that's not wanted, needs to be removed. And scum is the name we give to a thin layer on top of liquid or a film of dirt. froth, of course, also comes from rash movements. You know, it's a mass of small bubbles caused by agitation, be that by wind or by machine. So this whipped air, which can be folded into liquids, we know that from ice creams and desserts. Froth is also produced out of fermentation, sugars fizzing up a substance. Froth can come from dis-ease within the body. We might think, for example, of the froth emergent from the nose and the mouth of someone subject to a Novichok attack, a nerve agent, which disrupts the connections between brain and organs, and the lungs begin to stop functioning, and this sort of uncontrollable production of soft materials, of vomit, diarrhea, and froth within the body is triggered, and that froth eventually suffocates the victim. So we think about froth in the way that it's sort of produced by and productive of atmospheres, environments, encounters between people. And I think one of the things froth does as a substance is it sort of unscales and rescales. It's often requiring us in various ways to think at atomic scales, at the mesoscale, at that sort of intermediate scale, and at the macro, and to think about the passages between them. It becomes a sign of transience. I mean, we also talk about trivial froths that pop and pass. With dissipations that are hard to map, it's a sort of unpredictable materiality. Can't necessarily predict where it will appear or where it will go or what extent it will have. But it's also a toxic and drastic presence. So that toxic, drastic presence, that froth that clogs rivers as toxic waste, is connected in some way to what has become very much a symbol of our networked economy. You know, on the one hand, that's, you know, there's a massive production for global markets that produces concentrations of production in certain parts of the world, that produces a busyness of activity and a chemical surplus that results in froth through highly technologized and low regulated practices. But connected to that at some other end of that chain in our lives, froth is also being produced in every coffee bar, you know, to top the coffees, you know, even plant milk sort of make it now. And there's a line of connection from that environmental production of pollution out of a hyper-fueled economy to the domestic fueling of labor in other metropolises. And there's a weird way, you know, in which it turns sculptural.
So that's, I think, a really interesting example of how a material is kind of encapsulated in the book, and how, for example, with Esther, she indeed injects a kind of poetry and searches for this metaphor that is bleeding in what she writes, bleeding into and out of science, and in which technology and materials emanate thought. In other contributions, and the last two I probably will discuss, are ways of thinking of how substance kind of shifts and takes takes form, because the others have a sense of fluidity, right? And here, you with Esther's work, you see them grasping or taking some kind of form. And for Hannah Landecker, who is a sociologist of science, she looks at the philosophy as something kind of slightly fetid, which is the odor of rancid butter. She looks at rancid butter and attaches a philosophical dimension to that in the essay. For poet Lisa Robertson, this is another Canadian poet, also the book, she looks more at the body as a repository of geometry. And I wanted to leave this presentation with her poetry, where she's exposing and putting or making more explicit the kind of textual constructions of flows and fluids and how they connect to the body, connecting materiality to its frictional surfaces and destabilizations, and also kind of grants it or looks at its own embodied quality or the embodied quality of language. And so all in all, I think what brings together these writers is about their own engagement with a certain kind of materialism, and we can discuss that later. But first I'll leave you with this and some concluding remarks.
Coronal suture's first arcade. It's explaining, it's appearing, it's unestranged from enormity's prick of a spiny plant, like a rose as experimenting, it's bursting, and usually it's repeating. Why is form a dog, as a horse, as a deer, as a fish, and a bramble, a greater, rapacious? The second cervical vertebrae is repeating, is a question we can ask with our bodies. And what is a tooth? Coccyx is the beak of an ancient dove below the sacrum. The tip of the sacrum places in the person a sensation of slow form repeating. It doesn't require its own skin to repeat. Fox, a foxtail, a lizard as so as a small flask of modern oil at the throat. The repeat carries between bodies. What's made in this space are theories, and thymus, a rising of beneficial smoke as thorax, as guitar, the hairs exact, and between bodies forms not ever exact, ever without a stupendous body, so the repetition is never exact. This is why form is always learning how, as it moves across surfaces on the cleft above the lips to be. Repetition is never exact. This is why form is learning or becoming, or how, as it moves across timely surfaces, sucked when kissing. Sometimes the lower lip has a crease like a waking girl in the real territory of the conceptual. The liver is a crown, and it is a vessel. It constitutes our life. Form is folding. The full part is a vase. The nostril is cartilage connecting mineral salts. The root of the belly, the palate, a celestial dome, a vault, a sky, a nylon-like connecting, dissolving palace. The tongue is a stitch, a root, a complex tissue made of crystalline constituents as free-floating folds motivating intestines as a nest. The bowel is blind, the rectum founds it all. The anus is a ring, a door, a precipice. The nervous system orients vast complexities to make them even less efficient. We're trying to solve efficiency, luckily. Sphincter's a crow, the liver's a table, a summit, a choir, a door. The tracheal artery is a country flute. The lungs are apples. Each part of the heart is named differently, but it seems to be prettily resisting. Generally, heart is a vase with little ears. The spinal column is a canal out towards the periphery and also of marrow. The thorax is also a tortoise and a stall. The ribs are fronds, and these are also in the same lake. They are spades. The greater ribs are boats. They are maritime. Together the ribs form a kind of anywhereness and any oneness, the teeth of a comb, which is not only a grooming implement, but a tool for their role as relations in a behavior, as weavers. The rib cage, then, their loom. The shoulder blades are plates, and they make writing pads or little desks. These desks are winged. When our hands feel empty, they are not empty. The clavicles are keys, and they close and open the gate between the throat, and sweetly there was a suture there. Touch is a really unstable compound metaphor, but it does have a head. The radius is a tailor or a drum stick, a brooch, and historically a hinge. The hand is a rustic cheese plate. The same for the feet. The fingers are a phalanx of snakes or of fishes. The skin is tree bark. In this place, the voice is touching you. It comes to a physiological work. This is a representational problem, something like memory work. This is a transformational work about the domestic nature economy, sufficient yet imperceptible. It is medicinal. The cheeks are melons, are bowls or concepts or clods. The stomach is a mouth. Nostrils are the lairs of little animals or fish. Choirmaster names them, indistinguishable from anarchy. Every cell's means of turning everything into transcendent, operatic, the heart as well as the liver. We can compare the liver to a city or a mansion, and the intestines are the market gardens surrounding it. The veins are roads leading up to the city gates. No proper limit, no verbal chain continually altering. The cardiac veins are wee snakes, the ears continually altering internal conditions. A measuring cup and a conch, it is among the kitchen utensils between our nerve endings and our motor units, like the female sex that thrives behind the earlobe. There is a bony poppy kissing wildly at the edge of capital. This experience can constitute a break in sincerity, density, and scale. The helix of the ear is a bracelet. The ear is also a hive. It produces wax, which is a humor. It is the nest of a swallow. As well, the eye sockets are basins for washing grain. The eye is carnival, artifice, intrigue, wanderings, root. The eyeball like a sun, like a cheek, like a breast. The white of the eye is a river pebble. The glance is a throw of stones. The iris is a rain. On this conceptual metamembrane, a luxurious nomad pubis. The eyelid is skirt. The eyelashes are the outer surface of the mind, that album, berry or nymph, pip, barleycorn, hill, or sparrows completely and ardently send their action, thriving, foray, touch, this suture right now.
So that piece is in the back of the book. You can read it. That is an earlier work from Lisa that she presented in one of her in her books. And so there are some commissions in the book, and also some works that were really important for us to have. So how can we make sense of experience and express modern life, the social upheavals and the cataclysmic historical events unfolding around us? The terrain of eco-criticism asks us how to look at ourselves and the world around us, examining not only the socially constructed categories of reality, but reality itself. Here, eco-critique offers a valuable scaffolding to make sense of our contemporary experience enraged with flood, fire, famine, pestilence. But ours is no ordinary essentialist eco-criticism. As our material struggles continue to manifest, flowing, seeping, leaking, shaping, cascading amidst the effects of disease and environmental loss and degradation, let the embodied power of language and thinking be alive and be agential. Let it move and provoke. This world, our world, as explored throughout these texts, is a shifting one. It's forever flowing. Sometimes it stops. Sometimes it pivots. It tells us, though, that sometimes loudly and sometimes not, that the only permanence is change. The following texts navigate our liquid modernity between chance and contrivance, between the given and the made. They are forays into making matters flow, regardless of expectation and regardless of their consequences. So I welcome your questions. So I can talk a little bit more about the actual structure of the book if you'd like. It was designed by Atelier Brenda together with Sophie Kiege from Brussels. She's originally from Ghent, and the footnote system is one of the, I think, high praises of the book, because we've integrated a kind of footnote system where you could see probably in the GIF before, which treats the citations like clouds or like little condensations, and so that's the way we integrated them into the text. That was really beautiful. We looked at that into some texts from Barbara Orland and her historical references, and also for even the small signages too. So we look at these were texts from 1700s, and we integrated them into the text in the body of the text. So this works, I think, really well in the book. There's also, like, through the idea of the brine was created as a visual register in Sophie's language by using like this kind of briny bones outline in the beginning, and then she later what she does is disassemble like these kind of ghost brines throughout the book. And so you see traces moving through the text, and if you put them together, they of course spell out the title. And we have like several different covers, but the what's really nice about the way she conceived this, or we all came together to conceive it, was about having the sense that it has this feeling like sludge or like a runoff, and it gives you a sensation of reading it that has a contradiction in thought of, one, what are you reading? Because sometimes people don't exactly know what is a brine, much less an electric brine. And it has like the intention was to make it look like this sort of toxic runoff that is normally on the sides of extraction sites. But in English, brine also alludes to pickling, so it's like I think it gives you different sensations when you're reading and feeling it. There's a very extensive appendix also, which outlines all of the live events that I discussed at the beginning related to James Lee Byers' format. And then it gives a very extensive list of our guest appearances, like all the different writers and thinkers, such as Elizabeth Povinelli, who's been invited, Esther Leslie, Barbara Orland, Tim Ingold, Ilvia Wilk, recently Anne Boyer, geographer Kai Bosworth, and we have numerous contributors, and also there's the extensive reading list. So we've had about now 35 sessions, and here it lists up to the time of printing all the different readings. So it shows this relationship between literature and science studies or scientific thinking, and you can get a sense of how the kind of the ideas that we're navigating and working through as almost like a form of an inquiry. So I welcome your questions.
So it's a book that really has to be studied, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that you just flip through. And you say
It's very visual when you read it. I mean, it's extremely visual, no? Without images, but.
there's different colors?
Yeah, because Sophie made about, we chose from like 15 covers. Yeah. Yeah. But printed, there's one. Because the book is almost sold out, we're going to print with a new cover. It's going to be printed in January, actually, for the new edition.